Welcome back to the Friday Golf Podcast. I am your host, Andy Johnson, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by the legendary Jim Bones Mackay. Jim joins us to talk about kind of the golf world, the golf season, as well as the Ryder Cup. He will obviously be covering it as part of NBC's team, and he also recently just created some content with Aon called the Bethpage Course Insights, which is live on the Ryder Cup YouTube channel at rydercup.com/Aon. That's live and available for everybody to go watch on Monday, August 18th. So check out Bones' series there on the Ryder Cup page, but we're really thrilled to have him on to just chat about the golf season and everything ahead. So before we get to Bones, let's take a quick break to talk about our partner, Vuori. Vuori makes some of the best athleisure clothes that I've ever worn. It draws on inspiration from the coastal California lifestyle, and they make products that stand the test of time and hope to inspire others to live a vibrant and healthy lives. Everything is designed for working out, but doesn't look or feel like it. This is probably my favorite thing about it is you can go do a workout before you hit the gym. If you get sweaty, you could go socialize in this stuff. It's so comfortable. You'll want to wear it all the time. Honestly, it's comfier than whatever you're wearing right now. The product is incredibly versatile, and it can be used for training like running, strength training, running, yoga, and it's also great to wear lounging on the weekend. So a product that I love is their Dream Knit Jogger. It's the softest jogger on the planet. It is Vuori's softest premium stretch fabric, and it's lightweight. It has a relaxed feel, and it is moisture wicking with 4-way performance. So if you're interested in Vuori, check out vuori.com/egg. That's VUORI.com/egg. And you'll get 20% off your first purchase. That's vuori.com, VUORI.com/egg. All right, let's get to Jim Bones Mackay here, and let's talk golf. All right, Bones, we've got the Ryder Cup coming up. It is it's wild that I feel like you blink, and I imagine this is for you doing, a lot of weeks of on-site coverage. You blink and all of a sudden another golf calendar is somehow over. We're at the end of the big events of 2025. What to you, what's been the big takeaway from this season so far?
That, certainly, Rory getting over the hump in the fashion that he did at Augusta National and winning the Masters and obviously the career Grand Slam, with immense weight on his shoulders, I thought was a huge story relative to this year. And of course, the reminder that Scottie Scheffler is the best player in the world. What that guy does week in, week out, the way he does it, the way he plays, the Nicklaus way he goes about doing, take care of his craft is just never ceases to blow me away. So certainly they're the two big stories for me. And, certainly as we head into the latter part of the year and certainly the Ryder Cup, looking for the reemergence of a couple of guys that could potentially help that team a lot.
The next couple of weeks are going to be big for the American Ryder Cup team. And there's, I think, a little bit of uncertainty at the back end. I think if you compare it to the European team, it almost feels, especially with Matt Fitzpatrick's resurgent play, it feels like there's maybe one spot available on the European team versus the American team. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens with the back end of it. We're relatively fresh off of Scotty's performance at the Open, which you had a front seat to. You had a front seat to, the player that he's getting compared a lot to these days, Tiger Woods. You were inside the ropes, going duking it out with him in his heyday. If you were, you obviously have seen so many great players the last 30 plus years in golf. what is it about Scotty that is that kind of separates him and puts him in this ascending kind of class of player that he seemingly is quickly going up the ranks of?
For me, it's where he gets to mentally. He looks like a guy out there when he's playing who's got, nothing bothering him in the world other than the task at hand, on the golf course on that particular golf hole that day. He strikes me as a guy that has, very little baggage in terms of, what he brings to the golf course. He's supremely confident. And it's fascinating to watch him go about his business. I mean, I mentioned Nicklaus a couple of minutes ago, and that's the guy I compare him to, quite a bit in terms of the way he goes about his business. And it's just head down and walk to the green, hit your putt, go to the next tee, go through your process with Ted Scott. I covered him for three of the 54 holes at the Open Championship, and we never spoke once. He's that kind of just, as an on-course reporter, you tend to have the occasional conversation with players here and there. Scotty's, so plugged in. He's just doing his thing, and I completely leave him alone when we're out there. And it's fascinating to go about seeing it. And, you talk about, the comparisons potentially to Tiger Woods. Tiger, they're different in the way they go about their business. And as I said at the Open Championship, I didn't think in my lifetime I'd see a player that I would be as willing to say, gosh, this guy's he's close to Tiger. He's certainly not Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods is the best player I've ever seen, and probably will be through the course of my lifetime. But Scotty, he's an amazing, amazing player. And I got called out on social media about a year ago for saying I thought that Scotty could get to 10 majors, and I'm sticking with it. After him picking off 2 this year, he's at 4, and I think there's a great chance he could get to double digits.
It's amazing what the multi-win seasons do for your totals. There's so few. The scarcity of majors only being 4 a year. And there being, you figure in the elite rung of golfers, there's 30 players that are, their seasons are, they're 20, we'll say 20 players. Their seasons are in their success of their seasons really kind of dependent on how you perform in these 4 weeks, right? And when you pick off 2, the leaps, like it kind of probably sounds a little bit obvious, but then when it happens, you're like, wait, Scotty just went from 2 to 4. And it's like, if you get 2 next year, he's at 6, and I think the number of players that have won multiple majors in multiple years is extremely small. You have obviously very unique experience in this, and something that stood out to me this major season with Scotty. I think a lot of people talk about his strategy and his target selection and how he plays very smart. But beyond just like the target selection, I think something that stood out and it really resounded. It was Saturday on the 14th hole. They had that back flag.
Yes.
And that's probably, one of the scariest approach shots on that golf course. And, you're having to deal with, elevation change, a very narrow green that's shedding balls, and a back flag that's just naturally hard to get at.
Yeah, fairway slopes from right to left. Yep.
And you think about these players, everybody talks about like smart targets. There also is like an aspect of that doesn't get talked about as much as the commitment to your target and the confidence to swing freely with the target. Like I think what these great players, and you way more experienced with this, but you have a target, but then you also in the back of your mind have like, I'm bailing here.
Yeah.
Like to me, what stands out about Scotty beyond just like the target selection is that once he selects a target, I feel like he swings freer than everybody else in the world. Where his confidence of, and obviously he has a lot of reason to be confident. He's the best iron player in the world, but the ability to just like hit shots at these very well placed targets and go at these that are scary shots. Like he doesn't bail out. like a lot of players do in those situations.
Completely agree. I think some of that, certainly Ted Scott's not hitting a shot out there, but I think it speaks volumes for that relationship and the trust they have in each other in terms of picking out, said targets. But you're exactly right. Tiger was the same way, in that people gave Phil Mickelson a really hard time back in that era for overly aggressive play, and you can argue yes or no on many things that went on in Phil's career, but certainly I thought Tiger was a guy that was quite a bit more aggressive than people ever gave him credit for, if you will, and of course pulled off the shots as you're referring relative to Scotty. But to your point, I think that's very well said, that Scotty, he'll take on that target, get it back there to that flag on 14 that you're referencing, and give himself a look.
It's like almost a conservative with their targets, but extraordinarily aggressive with their commitment to the target. And yes. I think that's like an underrated aspect of the shot, is the commitment to the target,
Yes.
And just while we're here, with your experience caddying in these different generations, how has the strategy of how players move around a golf course changed over 30 years?
Well, I felt like it certainly changed a little bit when the square grooves were outlawed, and chipping, for some guys at least, became a little bit tougher than it had previously been in terms of short-sighting yourself. But I think with the advent of these devices now, like do with TrackMan and with the quad, that these guys have this incredible feedback now in terms of how far they're hitting the ball, how far the ball is going on the range. It rained last night, and the air is a little heavy this morning, and the ball's not going quite as far. I think that with the information they have at hand, it gives them a little bit of an edge in terms of getting at flags maybe you couldn't have in past generations. It's a really, really good question. I think that certainly we're seeing, players come out of college now with better short games than they did, maybe a generation ago, and guys aren't quite as scared of certain flags as they had been previously. But it's a great point that you make relative to guys kind of getting after it a little bit more than we're used to seeing.
Yeah, the young players, I guess like one of the things with young players, I do think like that there's like, you see it with the Open sometimes, is like when you get a little bit more nuanced of a test, that's where the youth kind of shows. But for the most part, with the way the PGA Tour operates, it just it's never been. It's wild. I think some of it's a immense talent layer, but I think the riddle of playing PGA Tour golf has been a little bit simplified over the years.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And the talent we're seeing coming out of college these days is crazy. A buddy of mine's currently working some events for Jackson Koepka, and he was telling me, just how incredibly good this young man is, who I think is going to be a junior in college this coming year, and certainly a player at Cypress Point in the Walker Cup this fall, and a good guy to keep an eye on. But these guys are showing up and finishing top 10 and, borderline contending with what Luke Clanton did last year. It's amazing to see.
Yeah. You're always reminded to, is who's the best at 21 isn't going to be who's the best at 25 always.
Right.
Sometimes you get those generational stars, and who the best at 25 doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the best at age 30. And you look at like the most recent example would have been that Matt Wolff, Victor Hovland, Colin Morikawa, where they all burst on the scene at the same time. And it's like, they all won in short order. They all, and then it looked like Morikawa is going to, be the best. And he's got like a very nice head start. But now it's like, Hovland and him, and, who ends up having the next best 5 years. And you see this over like the arc of careers. Like I think Phil and Ernie Els had this, 25-year run where, you could have all these different arguments, and Phil's overall long-term longevity, kind of probably pushes him past in most people's books, Ernie. But then that early part of the career, Ernie had the majors that Phil didn't have. And, it's a, one of the things with like Clanton is like there are these other guys that got their cards too, Gordon Sargent and David Ford, and like you've heard nothing about David Ford, and that makes me almost wonder like maybe he ends up being the best because nobody's talking about him, right?
Right.
And it's because like he was the best player in the PGA Tour U rankings. It is the young part of the game, and Koepka, from a lot of people say Koepka might be the best of all of them, and from what I've gathered, it's the driver and the putter that are just at a different level than most people, most young golfers, where he's driving it, extremely dominant, and it'll be really fun. I think like what's been nice with, Golf Channel over the, recent years has been the increased college and amateur coverage, both on the men's and women's side.
Yeah. Are you going to the Walker Cup?
I am. It's I'm pretty excited about that. It's I'm unfortunately not going to be in town for the amateur, which will be fun to watch at Olympic Club, a golf course. I think that is a would I want to play Olympic Club every day? No, but do I enjoy watching championship golf at Olympic Club? Yes, because the shot demands are so high out there.
Yeah.
So I will be at the Walker Cup though. Are you going to be there?
Yes, it was, the way my schedule's set out in terms of NBC events, it pretty much falls into place where I'm going to work. But when I got back to work there at NBC after caddying for a spell, one of the first things I did is ask that I could work this Walker Cup at Cypress Point. It's my favorite golf course of all time. And I just can't wait to be on property that week. It's going to be incredible.
What makes it your favorite course? Like, what are your favorite aspects of Cypress?
Well, I think just the property. Every time I'm there, and I've had a chance to play it quite a few times, I can't believe there's a golf course on that piece of land. And you play, and you just have the best time. And of course, you've got the holes that take you out, and you play in the trees there for a few holes, and then you come out on 7, 8, 9, 10 and all that, and play away, and then head towards the ocean. And ultimately you're having this amazing day, and you get to 15, 16, and 17. And you're like, are you kidding me? These have to be the 3 greatest holes in the world, back to back to back. And I just think it's beyond special. I love the way the club operates. Casey Reamer, the pro there, is one of the great guys in the business, in the golf industry, that is. And I just love absolutely everything about that golf club.
I think it's like impossible to be in a bad mood there. I've noticed I usually play really well, and I think it's because like I'm just like in a state of bliss.
Yes,
it's like probably a sign of like the way my mentality should be every round I play golf. But like there's like I'm just like in this like state of euphoria, and I play well. In terms of the competition, I can't think of like a better hole for match play late in a round than hole 16. I mean, that's going to be amazing. I mean, that you get that wind coming in off the left, and you're hitting lumber into that thing, and you can't miss short right. It's that hole I think gets harder every time you play it.
I agree with you. I know it's got my number. I don't know how you've done on it, but I just the fact that you stand on that hole, as you say, in those kinds of conditions, that any kind of miss hit and it's wet. There's no such thing there as hitting something a little bit in the heel and you still have a great chance to make 3. I mean, you hit one, off center there, and you're in a whole lot of trouble. So, as you say, I mean, the 16th hole in a match play format on that golf course, it's going to be absolutely incredible.
It's funny. The first time I played it, I almost aced it.
Wow!
Like landed like it was. I almost went deuce, but on 15, 16. But ever since that time, I think I hit it the second time. But every other time I've hit in the water. And the last time I played for Media Day a couple weeks ago, and I hit it left in the water, and I was like genuinely happy with the result because I knew I could drop up by the green.
Yeah.
Like in my head when I was teeing, I was like, if you're gonna miss left. Like talking about like Scotty and commitment to targets. Like those would be not being committed to my target and just failing left. Because I honestly, I was thinking about it. I might just start laying up on that hole.
I've certainly done it.
It's like a delightful layup. Like you hit it over there, and it's like, oh, I can make 3 here. I'm not going to make worse than a 4.
Exactly.
You know the original. There was an iteration of the routing where that would have been a par 4, and it would have played from like kind of more back and to the right, kind of like off of 15. And it would have played that way. And you talk about like a fascinating short par 4. You know, it's obviously one of the greatest holes in the world. But I think in that iteration, it still would have been one of the greatest holes in the world, just different, you know?
Yes.
So, yeah, that event, you know, I wanted to, you know, before we've swerved all different directions as podcasts usually do. But I did want to, I didn't get to watch Jack in his heyday. And I'm just curious, you know, the Scotty comp to Jack, because I think it's natural everybody's going to Tiger just because it's more recent, and you know the vast majority of the public watch Tiger that are golf viewers. And what was, you know, how would you describe Jack Nicklaus's dominance, and how does that, you know, how is that similar to how Scotty goes about his dominance?
I would say that in terms of those two guys, they are incredibly comfortable on the biggest stage that they play on. Whereas I think you get some guys, you know, that, you know, are going to certainly run into some nerves, and certainly Tiger's the same way, but we're talking about Jack and Scotty right now. But I find that Scotty is just, he looks the same to me Sunday at the Open Championship, walking off the first tee, as he does on Thursday at the Waste Management Open in Phoenix. He just gets to this place in his head that enables him to play his best golf. And I think they're very similar in the way they pick golf courses apart and, you know, hit the ball pin high in the center of the green and leave themselves uphill putts, whatever the case may be. I just think that there's a lot more, many more similarities between Scotty and Jack than there are Scotty and Tiger.
It's, you know what, I feel like he loves the ritual and almost the process of being a pro golfer. It seems like he is. Is that a challenging thing to get a player to? You know, golf is monotonous. Playing great golf is like fairly monotonous. Is it a challenge to get a player? Is it hard to get a player to just, you know, do you stick with the stuff that works week in, week out?
That's a great question. I think, you know, certainly, you know, players run into a level of frustration or a bad break here and there, and they feel like they have to force the issue. And I see that, you know, where you're going with this, and Scotty seems to stick to the script perfectly. But I just think that, you know, when talking about Scottie Scheffler, we're talking about an outlier in terms of the amount that he commands his golf ball. You know, he's, you know, to put it in a, you know, a baseball analogy, if I can. I mean, to me, he's Greg Maddux, but he can throw 98. You know, he's got plenty of speed off the tee, and he knows exactly how far all of his clubs are going, and you know, he can pick things apart as a result. But you know, he does everything so well. And of course, his putting stats now have improved so much over the last few years with the work he's done with Phil Kenyon. It's just, he's just something else. And I love watching the guy. And you know, obviously, it's going to be fascinating to see what kind of Ryder Cup he has, because you know, the Americans are going to rely on him to a tremendous degree. You know, given the pressure that's going to be on him there that Friday morning.
I mean, you think back 4 years to Whistling Straits, and you know, he was the unproven last pick. He hadn't won. on tour.
Hadn't won, right?
And then Jon Rahm's putting together this incredible Ryder Cup, incredible performance. He's keeping the European team in it.
Yep.
Rory was having a bad week. You look at it, you look back at that Ryder Cup team, and Rory is I think he was 12th or something in the world rankings. Victor Hovland was, a fringe top 15 player, and it was Jon Rahm was the guy, and he's having this great, and then it's they just threw Scheffler in. I remember the discourse being they're just kind of giving that matchup, and then sure enough, I think it was Scotty's 4 up through 4 or something in that match, and it was this. You could point to a lot of things, but him contending at Harding Park, early in his PGA Tour career, the Ryder Cup, and then that next year launches him into the class of player that he is now.
Yeah. But it was, as you say, it was his coming out party there at Whistling Straits. And, who knows? I had heard, just through the grapevine that he was like a player pick that week. That, you certainly get Ryder Cups where these captains will walk in amongst the 6 guys that are going to make it on points, or the guys that are ultimately going to be there. And they'll say, who are we not going there without this, that week? Who's our lock picks? And I had heard that there was just an absolute avalanche of support for Scotty, and he, as you say, even though he hadn't won yet, and they show that kind of faith in him, that kind of love, if you will, and he responds with that incredible victory over Jon Rahm, and off he goes, and he's been the best player in the world for a large part ever since.
Sometimes when you play, I imagine with these guys, when they play with someone, the result, golf's such a results driven sport where it's what did you finish? But there's more to the story than the finish or the wins. Is there another player that reminds you that maybe wasn't scorching right out of the gates, that everybody was that guy is better than what the public perception thinks right now, where the players knew or the caddies knew before the results really showed it?
That's a really interesting question. There's certainly going to be several examples of that. Though he's obviously on the European Ryder Cup side, I would say Victor Hovland is a guy that there was a huge buzz about, very early on, and people were talking about this guy's can't miss. He's gonna win majors. He's gonna be a force in the Ryder Cup. You can go back into the mid '90s. I remember they used to have this amazing tournament called the Dunhill Cup in Scotland, where you would play for your country. There would be 3 guys, and you would have play stroke play against 3 guys from another country. And we went over there in 1996. It was Phil, Marco Mira, and Steve Stricker, and the guys on the other teams had basically never heard of Steve Stricker. I mean, they'd seen his name in the newspaper and whatnot, but they had no idea what they were dealing with. And the U.S. ended up winning that week, and the only strategy we had as a team was we were going to put Stricker against the best player on the other team, and he was just waxing everybody. And that was an example of us and certainly players around the tour and caddies having an idea of how good Steve was very early on in his career, and the amazing putter that he was. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. There's another player that I'm going to have to. It's going to come to me here in a second that would certainly relate to what you're talking about.
I feel one that when I think about it is one that comes to mind is there's that great Steve Williams quote about Brooks Koepka couple years before he went on his major run. There's certain guys that when you walk by on the range, it sounds different. And Brooks Koepka's and I think that predated any of his major wins, and kind of you think about a guy that went and played on the European Tour and the Challenge Tour before he came to the U.S. There you can't fake it sometimes when you go around, or sometimes I think what's interesting about golf is especially you can play with someone and you could beat them on a day, but you walk away maybe knowing that they have stuff that you don't have, and I think that's like the interesting thing about like the highest levels of golf, and like a Scottie Scheffler being a player pick would be one that like probably some of those guys had seen him play on tour and be like, I don't have that.
Yeah, no, it's right. During the pandemic, whatever it was, 2021, the tour played 2 consecutive weeks in Columbus, Ohio, at Jack Nicklaus's place there at Muirfield Village, and I caddied both of those weeks for Matt Fitzpatrick. And I can't remember if it was the first week or the second week, but we got a Thursday Friday pairing, and one of the guys we were paired with was Scottie Scheffler. And I'd seen his name before, didn't know much about him, knew that he was a relatively new guy on tour. And it was fascinating to watch him play at that stage in his career and just to see the shots that he hit. And, I can remember being on the range with Matt post rounds and looking at each other going, wow, what's up with that Scheffler kid? This kid's going places. And, it's I love seeing guys play at that stage and where you can just see the superstar in them just waiting to burst out.
Yeah, it's amazing. I played this is a lower level. I played golf with this guy who's become a really good buddy, and it was like the very early days of me doing this. And at the time I was playing competitive golf at a good level for a working stiff, and I remember I played like an early morning round. We were at a bar the night before. And I might have clipped him on the day, but I walked away and I was like, oh my God, like he's so much better than me. Like, yeah, so much better. And like now he's like one of the, 10 best mid-ams in the world. And it's like, he's way better, Yeah. And at the time he wasn't like even, I don't think he was 25 yet. But it's, it's just like funny how you could just sometimes tell it's like these people have something that you don't have. And it's at every level of the game, whether it's at a club or at the pro level or at the even elite rungs of the pro level. All right, let's take a quick break to talk about our friends over at Groovit. Groovit brush is the best golf brush on the marketplace. They are veteran owned and operated. Really, this thing is amazing to clean grooves. If you want to play great golf, you got to have clean grooves. It's the only way you're going to know which way the shot is coming off the face. You see tons of tour pros using these brushes for that reason. They have the original Groovit brush, which holds water, which lets you spray and scrub your clubs with one tool. And they also have the Mini G. That's a smaller brush that doesn't use water. You see a lot of tour players have this attached to their belts on the range at every event. So check it out. This is a great product. I love this. You can buy it at Walmart, but if you want your discount, go to groovitbrush.com. Use the promo code FRIEDEGG for 15% off any purchase. Thanks to Groovit, and let's get back to Bones. In terms of approach, for a match play tournament, we've talked a little bit about the Walker Cup, a little Ryder Cup, and is there anything that you guys are doing different inside the ropes at match play tournaments than stroke play tournaments?
You talking about from a caddy or a player perspective?
Both. You can relay both. This is the unique perspective of you're not just somebody walking around with a notebook like me inside the ropes.
Yeah. No, I think certainly from a caddy perspective. Well, if you look at this year's Ryder Cup, we can almost, I think, nail how the golf course is going to be set up. It should play quite long, I would assume, and I don't think that there's going to be a lot of rough. So one of the things that I would be looking at as a caddy is your ability to play aggressively from the rough and still get after certain flags. Because you would think that I would think that the greens shouldn't be overly firm there that week. Certainly a lot of it's going to be weather dependent. But I just think that you go around the golf course as a caddy and you're just thinking birdies. You can't fake it at the Ryder Cup, and rarely is somebody going to give you a match. You've got to go out there and earn it. And I can remember walking the golf course at Hazeltine and you see, some opportunities to maybe get out there and make 5 or 6 birdies in a round and hopefully, grab a hold of the match that you're ultimately competing in. And I think I caddied for Phil there in his singles match against Sergio in 2016, and Phil made either 10 or 11 birdies on Sunday. And you just remember that they have these opportunities, and the golf course is set up in a fashion that really lets you get after it.
That I feel like the Rory Reed match that day at Hazeltine, the start of that match overshadowed what was like one of the greatest singles matches of all time, that Sergio Phil match. I mean, was that the best golf match that you've ever been a part of? I mean, the Stetson Phil at the Open was probably the best golf ever, maybe.
Some guy came up to me. I was at an Open Championship a few years later, and this guy came up to me who was some kind of math professor in Finland or something like that, and was telling me that it was Phil's performance, in which he finished second in that particular Open Championship, was the 5th greatest performance in the history of majors based on this research that he'd done. He had become fascinated with the fact that Phil had played so well and ultimately not won the tournament. But I think that Phil's duel with Payne Stewart late there at Pinehurst in '99 was also really, really good golf at an extremely high level on a great golf course. But Phil was one of the great players of all time, and he did a number of things incredibly well on big stages. But that Sunday at Hazeltine was way up there.
With match play being week in, week out on tour, they're playing the golf course, and you try not to get wrapped up with what other people are doing in a sense, and you're executing your game plan against the golf course. With match play, you're playing somebody else, and as much as I think people say, oh, you still play the course, you try and treat it like you're playing somebody else, and what they do, it alters how you play. With match play, do you see a different type of style from these players in terms of maybe they're a little bit more aggressive at times, and is there a difference in how they go about attacking a golf course?
I think so. I think that in match play, you certainly don't have to be perfect. You get away with a little something here or there. I just think, again, it's about aggressive play and being rewarded for it, and hitting the ball hard. I was laughing to myself this morning thinking about old Ryder Cup memories. If I could just tell a quick story, when we went to 2012, we had the tragic Ryder Cup in Chicago where the U.S. gave up a big lead on Sunday, but it was Keegan Bradley's first Ryder Cup as a player, and it was basically a done deal that entire week that he was going to play with Phil in alternate shot. And I don't know if you've heard this story, but I think that Phil may have pulled a fast one on him in terms of who was going to hit the tee shot off the first tee there in their first match. And I think Phil had planned on doing it and then informed Keegan pretty late in the process, oh, no, by the way, you're going to be teeing off on one. So they had their conversations. I knew that, ultimately Keegan was going to hit this tee shot. So I 4-caddied on the first hole there at Hazeltine, not Hazeltine, at Medina. And, I was about 300 yards off the tee, and you get out there and, it's a real Ryder Cup and you're so jacked up as a caddy, and it's just the most incredibly exciting week. And I can hear from 300 yards away the introduction, and from the United States, Mickelson, Bradley, and to tee off, here's Keegan. And he hits this tee shot. And when you're 4-caddying as a caddy, you need to pick the ball up, get your act together, find the thing, get out there and take care of the yardage. And I got nothing. I'm looking around. I don't know where this ball went. And the marshals are standing next to me. No one knows where it went relative to the shots that had been played there earlier in the day. And then someone says, look over there. And there's a ball 40 yards short of the green. Keegan had literally hit the longest drive of his life off this first tee. And, we got a big kick out of it, and the match moves on. And we got to about the 4th or 5th hole, and Phil was hitting a putt. And so I had, 30 seconds to myself. And Keegan walked over to me and said, "Hey, I got a question for you." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "What happened on holes 1, 2, and 3? I completely blacked out." And he could not, for the life of him, remember anything that happened in the first few holes because he was just so amped up and just driving it so far and was so into the moment. And I think it just speaks for where these guys go mentally that week, how excited they are to represent their country and their peers and all Americans, and and the same works to the other side as well. It's just the most amazing competition, and they just can't wait to get after it.
I imagine you gotta from a caddy perspective, it could be challenging because of the sheer amount of adrenaline trying to figure out how the body and how the swing and distances react.
No question. You look back over certain shots that you caddied at or with your player, and I kick myself now when Phil had that match with Sergio. We had a wedge into the last hole. It was like 128 yards, and beautiful weather there in Minnesota that weekend. And I did not do a good enough job of factoring in adrenaline and where these guys were at in terms of how far they were hitting the ball because of how jacked up they were. And Phil hit this wedge shot, and it was all over it. And we didn't get the reaction from the crowd that I expected to. And you walked up there, and the ball was 25, 30 feet behind the flag, and I was just so upset with myself that I hadn't factored in enough for adrenaline relative to that shot being played on the 18th hole in a match as tense as this one. And Phil made it anyway down the hill. But you're right. There's so much to take care of and to consider in these matches, and you'll see guys do some pretty outlandish things that week because they have just so much pumping through their bodies.
Is that a challenge too? Is it more of a challenge than a normal tour event, just managing emotions that can happen throughout a match?
I would say without question. I think there's things that go on at the Ryder Cup that don't go on anywhere else, maybe also including the majors. The Ryder Cup is just unique unto itself. And in my experience, at least, I've never seen guys, feel quite as much pressure as they do at Ryder Cup. Certainly, if you've got the lead, the last round of a major, that's very similar as well. But I think that you feel so much pressure given the fact you've got 11 teammates, other caddies, the front office, if you will, with the captains. You just feel an incredible responsibility to get it done, and nobody wants to be the reason why you didn't get it done. And it's just I just think it's just the most amazing tournament, and I think that the Ryder Cup's what's so great about sports.
Well, yeah, it's a complete dynamic shift for these guys. I think one of the things that makes golf extraordinarily difficult is anything that's like a different feeling, a new feeling. I think that's when you see people struggle in major championships, it just feels a little different. There's more weight to it. With the these guys have played their entire careers really for the most part for themselves, and you learn this. If I grew up caddying, and then occasionally caddy for my friends in tournaments that and I find myself more nervous caddying than playing because I get more nervous because I'm not in control, and I think there's a layer of these guys having the weight of it's in a best ball or an alter shot, having the weight of I'm not just letting down myself, because I think it's easier to let down yourself than let down anybody else. And I think that's the added dynamic of the Ryder Cup or any team match play competition that it's new and it's a different feeling, and they just don't play it enough that you can get some really crazy outlier shots and performances, both good and bad.
Agree. Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's fascinating. One thing I will say about this Ryder Cup that I think is very important that hasn't necessarily happened at previous Ryder Cups is I think it's going to be very interesting to see is how close to the actual competition itself the 12 guys on the team actually play. In other words, is Napa going to end up with an amazing field this year because, everybody wants to play within a couple of weeks of the tournament. Whereas I think in Rome, the American team, a vast majority of them hadn't played for several weeks running up into the competition, whereas the Europeans had.
Yeah, the Europeans run up to the Ryder Cups perfect because they have all the European Tour's biggest event, effectively like the big swing of their season, and it leads right into the Ryder Cup. And as you did a lot of work. You have a digital series with Aon that like dives into the golf course and the course insights. In terms of what we can expect from Bethpage, what would you be looking at from like a skill set standpoint that you think will thrive at Bethpage Black, and type of things you'd be looking for if you were setting up a team?
Certainly some length off the tee. It's a big golf course. I also think that length off the tee can help in terms, psychologically, in terms of who you're playing against, especially if you're longer than the guys that you're competing against. But length off the tee, solid ball strikers, and it goes without saying, but in my experience, Ryder Cups are won, on putts between 10 and 20 feet, and who can create some momentum with that flat stick and ultimately get it done. So when I was with Aon and we were breaking down the golf course and looking at it a lot from a data-driven standpoint, I just think that you've got to have world-class ball strikers and certainly some guys that can pick up a little bit of heat with the putter. But length off the tee, I think that week is going to be extremely important.
Yeah, obviously big golf course with elevated targets, lots of greens up on ridges where hitting it high and long is a big benefit. And we saw that at the last PGA there, where you had Brooks and DJ way out in front, two of the, at the time, longest, most accomplished, drivers and ball strikers in the sport. With Bethpage, are there a couple holes that stand out in particular for match play?
Yeah, 15 for me is I think it's going to be a massive hole that week in terms of winning and losing. It's a very difficult tee shot because there's the whole dog legs to the left. It's an uphill second shot with some great hole locations on the green, but it's a very intimidating tee shot because it's hard to. You can't really, it's like an infinity edge fairway. You can't really see what you're hitting into, and there's very little to aim at. So I think that hole in particular could go a long way in determining a lot of matches as they come down the stretch.
That's I think like that whole back nine setup is pretty, there are a lot of holes that kind of like separate great, even the start of it. The finish 18 will be a fun finishing hole, obviously, like super executional tee shot. Bethpage, you hear about like great match play golf courses. I think like, great golf courses lend themselves to, great match play courses in general. And I think that's, one of the aspects of that Bethpage will bring is that it is going to be one of the better Ryder Cup venues that we will see.
Agreed. I think that it's one of the best golf courses in the country. It's relentless from the get-go. You're going to see birdies. You're going to see bogeys. The course, I imagine, will be in amazing, amazing condition. I know the first times I stepped on it in 2002 and 2009 for those two U.S. Opens, I couldn't believe the condition of the greens. They were like carpet. So I just think it's going to be amazing, and certainly a very pro-American crowd. I'll be a neutral observer that week working for NBC, but it's going to be an amazing show for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, and I cannot wait. I mean, we talked about you can't wait for the Walker Cup. Between the Walker Cup and the Ryder Cup this year, we've got some amazing golf this fall.
It kind of it makes for the letdown of major season being over. Is like not that harsh this year because with having both those events. With you mentioned the fans. You've been in the mix late. You've been late on Sunday, inside the ropes at Shinnecock, Bethpage, and Winged Foot. I'm curious if New York fans they have quite a reputation. Their reputation precedes themselves. Is there different dynamics based off of the different, big time courses in the Met area? I guess Baltusrol would be another one.
Yeah. It's funny at Baltusrol, when Phil won there in '05. We had the unique experience. Phil led early on Sunday, had some momentum, looked like the guy that was maybe going to win the tournament, and then gave up the lead in the middle of the round. And there were certainly some people in the gallery that weren't particularly happy with what was going on there. They'll let you know it. So, and Phil ended up, rebounding and winning the tournament on the 72nd hole, making a birdie. But it's going to be really, really interesting. I think that the crowds are going to be incredible. They're going to be really, really supportive. But if you go out there and lay an egg, they're going to let you know about it. So it's going to be incredibly unique. They're very knowledgeable sports fans. I hope we get a lot of local people from the Bethpage area that would make it that much more special. But I tell you, it's just to have it there. I just remember going there in '02 and seeing the setup of the golf course and seeing the huge bleachers behind the 17th green there, that par 3 up the hill. And a lot of people that week were talking about, can you imagine if we ever had a Ryder Cup here? And now all these years later, now it's happening. And I just think it's going to be one of the great Ryder Cup spots in the U.S. that we've ever seen.
'02, obviously you're in the mix. '06, you're in the mix at Winged Foot. What were your favorite memories? Maybe not favorite, but most vivid memories from Bethpage over the years in the majors.
I would say certainly the fans come to mind immediately. Just the quality of the golf course, just how relentlessly tough it is. As you say, the back nine, you get to 10. We had the fascinating thing happen in '02 where the USGA didn't anticipate the weather coming in, I think, on Friday as much as they could have, and guys couldn't reach the 10th fairway, which was made for some really interesting post-round discussion in the locker room on the range. That was a really, really interesting day. I think the weather could play a big part in this Ryder Cup. I don't know what we're going to get, but I think we can get just about anything in terms of sunshine, rain, warm, cool, whatever the case may be. But I just think that it's so unique to that area, and the fact that it's a public golf course. That brings a little something, a little flavor to the event itself. And, in terms of, the folks you get out there rooting for you, I can make a par on that hole. What are you doing? Kind of thing. So it's just a classic American venue.
What's a favorite Ryder Cup memory? You obviously talked about Hazeltine. Any other in the Keegan Bradley, any other Ryder Cup memories that jump to mind?
I mean, how much time you got? I mean, there's great memories. There's incredibly tough memories. I can tell you a story if we have a couple minutes about the very first Ryder Cup I ever went to, if you want.
Yeah, let's hear it.
In 1993, Phil won the International, and the Ryder Cup was going to be played that year at the Belfry, and Phil didn't get picked. It wasn't a big surprise at the time. He had won, he just turned pro. He'd only been pro for a year and a half, but Phil had won the International, and I had made a few bucks, and I was obsessed with going to the Ryder Cup. I wanted to go see it, wanted to go check it out for myself. So I thought to myself, I called my buddy Joe LaCava, who was caddying for Fred Couples. I said, if I buy a ticket to come over there to watch the Ryder Cup, can I crash on the floor of your hotel? Because I knew there'd be nowhere to stay. And he said, sure, of course you can. So I went over there. Flew over there on my own dime, found my way to the Belfry, and I was there about an hour, and I got pressed into service, if you will. And what I mean by that, this is back before there were 4 or 5 assistant captains and an unbelievable staff of people to take care of you. Back then, it was just Tom Watson, the captain, his assistant, Stan Thirsk, and nobody else. So in terms of, there being somebody to grab you a dozen balls or to grab you a sandwich or whatever the case may be, that turned out to be me. I got hired as the team gopher. So I'm running around during these practice rounds, just having the time of my life. So I've gone from being outside the ropes to now being inside the ropes, and it's great. So come Friday morning, it's time for the action to happen, and the players that are playing Friday morning go out and warm up on the range. And, guys are nervous, really, really nervous. They're hitting balls and not much is going on other than a little bit of small talk. And it's getting within about 5 or 10 minutes of the first group going off the first tee, which I think was Tom Kite and Davis Love playing somebody. And this huge fog bank rolls in and just chews up the entire golf course. Major fog delay. So they send the players to the locker rooms and they say, here's the deal. We're going to wait for this fog to leave, but we're not going to give you another chance to warm up. When this fog leaves because of TV, we got to get going. So we're going to go straight from the locker room to the tee. So now you got 12 guys or whoever's playing that morning in the locker room, and this fog's not going anywhere. And guys are, you're eating again. You're talking to your wife. You guys are pacing the floors. It's a really nerve-wracking time. And so Fred Couples, who's on the team, all the bags of the players were up against this wall near the locker room entrance. Fred's going through everybody's golf bag and checking out the newest, latest in terms of their equipment. He's making his way down this list of golf bags, and he gets to Davis Love's and he takes out Davis Love's 8-iron and he waggles it, and the head falls off the shaft, and this thing's bouncing around on this marble floor. And there's this gasp in the team room, and there's Fred just holding this shaft now. The club head's on the floor, and I swear to goodness, 30 seconds later, this guy comes in and said, 5-minute call, fog's leaving for Love and Kite. So Davis runs over, picks up his 8-iron head, grabs the shaft, and says to me, "Fix it." And this is back, before you had, Titleist trucks with everything known to man on it, where you could get something fixed. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. And he's given me this club to get fixed. And so, I'm in an absolute panic. I don't know what to do. I go to the pro shop. They say, we've got nothing. But I tell you what, if you cross that field over there, run across that field and then another field, you take a right at that cow kind of thing, there's a farmer there, and I guarantee you that guy's got epoxy. So I do what I'm told. I grab this shaft and this club head in the shaft, and I'm running here and I'm running there, and I see the farm in the distance, and I get out to where this is, and there's a very nice man there, and I say, "Do you happen to have any epoxy?" And this guy's got quite the garage and the barn going and this and that. He goes, "I certainly do." He epoxies the head, and we get it fixed. I run back, get out there. Davis and Tom Kite are on the 4th or 5th hole. Give him this 8-iron, and off they go. So they play this match. The Ryder Cup goes on. It was an incredible Ryder Cup. The U.S. was down. They were down and out. And John Cook and Chip Beck won a match against Faldo and Montgomery. They weren't supposed to win. This kind of flipped the script and the momentum of the entire Ryder Cup, and the U.S. was coming back now. And so we get out there on Sunday, and basically the Ryder Cup came down to one match, and it was Constantino Rocca against Davis Love. And the 18th hole of the Belfry, this incredibly difficult driving hole, dogleg left over water. And Davis Love, to this day, hit one of the greatest shots I've ever seen. Hit this 300-yard 3-wood, carried the water on the left out in the fairway, leaving just the short iron left into the green. And he had to knock the short iron on the green, 2-putt, and the U.S. was going to win the Ryder Cup. So I'm just watching from the side with all the players. He hits the short iron on the green. It spins back off a ridge. He's got a 2-putt from 40 feet, leaves it 6 feet short. So he's got a 6-footer now to win the Ryder Cup, which he makes. And, we all pour onto the green, and I'm, I'm 26 years old or something like that, and very new to the business and just the team gopher. And Davis came over to me and grabbed me and by my collar and said, "That was your 8-iron. I hit into the last hole." And it just, if I hadn't already fallen in love with the event at that point, I certainly did then in that moment. And, that was just a Ryder Cup story I'll never forget.
Did you have much of a club repair background when you were?
No, I got nothing. I mean,
So you just put the epoxy in and jammed it in there?
In the barn. I mean, I could, but the grip. I can't remember what kind of grips Davis had back in the day, but it was just an absolute mess. And this farmer, if you will, for lack of a better description, absolutely just saved the day.
Little did he know what he did to his home team.
Yeah, exactly right. A good point.
And I don't know if that would happen at Bethpage if a European needed some help from a nearby resident.
Go down to the local garage looking for some epoxy. Not a chance, brother.
Yeah. We're months out. Who would you give the edge to with your knowledge of Bethpage? Is there a side that you would tilt the advantage to?
Well, no. I think that both teams have a lot of length, and to your point about the European side, filling out very, very nicely. I think they're in really good shape, and I can't say enough for how much momentum you carry into a Ryder Cup as the defending champion, if you will. I think the Europeans are probably very happy with where they stand, and I think the American team's getting stronger by the week. I'm fascinated by the whole Chris Gotterup situation.
Yes.
I think that's going to be really, really interesting to see how that plays out, especially considering the young man's from New Jersey and could be a complete folk hero that week should he make the team and ultimately, do some damage. But I think this is lining up to be a very even heavyweight tilt.
All right. Big thanks for Bones for joining the podcast. That was fun. We'll have to have him back on. It was been great to get to know Bones over the last year. We did a video on our YouTube with Luke Colton, a potential Walker Cupper. Go check that out. It's on our YouTube channel at PGA Frisco. But big thanks to Bones for coming on, and big thanks to PJ Clark for editing, producing this podcast. We'll be back next week with a new episode of the Friday Golf Podcast.